Hey guys, welcome back to another very long overdue impressions video on Metroid Samus Returns on a Nintendo 3DS. A game that I beat a fairly long time ago, early in the year, but I never got around to do my impressions video, which is a shame, and I'm finally able to do it because I actually have gone back to the game in my pursuit to get 100% completion as far as all the items and whatnot. So I'm revisiting the game, and I had that, that itch to go ahead and make my long overdue impressions video of this game. And this is the type of impressions video that it's really weird that I haven't done one, because I really enjoyed this game, and I'm very grateful that Nintendo decided to remake this game right here, which is Metroid II. This is the alternate cover that you get if you flip the the original cover of the game, and I was able to get the special edition of the game on the 3DS that came with a soundtrack CD. And of course here we have the amiibos that I could not pass. These amiibos, they're so cool looking. We have the Metroid, and then obviously Samus right there, which they're pretty cool. So the full package is here as far as celebrating Metroid 2, which is a game that I actually played. If you guys dig back all the way maybe 4 years ago on my channel, I did an impressions video on Super Metroid, a game that it's one of my favorite games of all time. I play and beat that game originally back in the day, and I keep playing every now and then. And I did replay the game like 4 years ago and made an impressions video on that game, and that gave me the itch to play Metroid Fusion on the Game Boy Advance. And then I also had an impressions video shortly after my Super Metroid covering Metroid Fusion. And then my goal after that was to play Metroid 2, because I had that game as part of the Ambassador program on the Nintendo 3DS, or the virtual console, whatever it's called. So I was like, I'm gonna give this a shot. It's a somewhat of an obscure Game Boy game, and I did give it a shot, and I just could not get myself into the game to the point to complete it. I put some decent amount of time into the game, but it's one of those games that it's so old in terms of the mechanics, the presentation, the gameplay, that it's really hard to play nowadays. We're spoiled with all the modern mechanics and whatnot. And even with the additional, features that the virtual console offers, such as save states and whatnot, I just did not have the drive to complete that game. It's very obscure, very obtuse, no map available whatsoever. You really have to know where you're going and remember the places that you've been before. So I dropped that game off, and then the controversy happened a few years later, or maybe a year or two ago, when a fan-made remake of Metroid 2 was done, and I was actually excited to play that game, and I was on the verge of playing that game, and then Nintendo surprised us all by announcing the remake of Metroid 2, which is a game that I really wanted to play, and I'm really glad Nintendo decided to remake this classic. Now the second part of the controversy, because one of that was Nintendo shutting down the project by the fan-made game and all that. Some people were very upset. That was kind of like the first controversy, and then the second one was when Nintendo decided to hand the project to Mercury's team, which are known for their Castlevania, Lords of Shadows games. So a lot of people had doubts, because not everyone enjoyed those games. But the good news here is that even though people sometimes receive this news with skepticism, in my opinion, they did a fantastic job. Now, as far as ranking this game in comparison to the other side-scrolling Metroid games, this is probably, on my personal level, one of the lowest ones. But the good news is that the Metroid side-scrolling games are so high quality that even though this game is not the best, and in my opinion is one of the quote-unquote worst ones, this game still remains as a very solid title in the series. It follows the story of Metroid 2, which is very simple. It takes place right after the events of Metroid 1. So for those of you that have played Zero Mission or the original one on the NES, you're trying to eradicate this alien race called the Metroids. And in Metroid 2, you actually go to their home turf, the SR, I think 386, 388, I think it's the home planet of the Metroids. Yeah, SR388, I think. And you go to their home planet, and you're trying to eradicate this before the space pirates take advantage of using their, the power of the Metroids to take control of the universe, basically. So that's basically the story in a nutshell. And of course, if you guys have played Super Metroid, you sort of know the ending of Metroid 2, because the opening sequence kind of goes over of some things that have happened in Metroid 2. So for those of you that have played Super Metroid, you already know, what kind of like the ending for Metroid 2 was. So it's a very good game, and the cool thing about the remake is that it's a full-on remake. The place is different. Obviously, it takes place on the same planet, but the planet itself has a ton of new areas to explore. And of course, a Metroidvania type of game, you're gonna be exploring the areas left and right and going back after you get upgrades and whatnot. Oddly enough, I thought, even though this is a Metroidvania game, and the Metroid games are, that's where the name derives, this felt like a different one from Super Metroid and Metroid Fusion and Zero Mission. As far as the setup, it's very hard to explain, but as I was playing this game, I felt there was a taste of difference, in my opinion. That I don't know if it was a different, the fact that Mercury Steam developed the game, and maybe they designed the levels in a different way. But even though the concepts are the same, you get new power-ups, you improve your character, and then that allows you to go back to secret areas and gain new powers or unlock new areas and whatnot. Even though the concepts are the same, I felt like the progression on Samus Return was a little bit special and different when compared to the other games, in a good way. I think it gave like this coat of like fresh paint to the formula that I really liked. Another cool thing about the game, as far as the gameplay, is the introduction of what I called modern mechanics. This game has a divided fan base, in the sense that a lot of the purists complain that this game offers teleport points, or that this game offers, for example, the teleport points. Nowadays I'm a busy adult person, and I really don't have the time to fool around. I have nothing to prove. I've beaten games back on the Super Nintendo era without the help of any cheat codes or anything like that. For me, there's nothing else to prove out there. And if this game is gonna offer me mechanics to help me get through the game quicker, or just avoid the nuisance of manually have to backtrack to a certain location, then I'll be more than glad to take those mechanics. If you don't like those mechanics, you can always avoid using them. So I don't know where a lot of the purist fans out there are saying, no, it was too easy, the game gave you like teleport points, or even the ability to use the action items, which for example, one of the cool things, in my opinion, in this game is that you can use this kind of like sonar radar thing, where every time you use it, your Aeon gets depleted a little bit, but it shows you the location of all the hidden areas in the game, and the hidden items that are in the map. For someone that wants to complete the game 100%, it's a very big help, and I was very glad that the game offered that option. But again, a lot of people complain, oh, this is making the game too easy. People are gonna get the wrong impression of what the Metroid franchise is. I don't really care. It's up to you if you want to use that element, but personally, I recall, in the Super Nintendo, using that X-ray beam, and you had to scan every wall, every nook and cranny if you wanted every like missile upgrade and things like that. So, in my opinion, that was not very fun. I mean, and I've been there, I've done that. I have nothing else to prove. I'll be more than glad to use the modern mechanics offered in Samus Returns, and in my opinion, that's a huge welcome and a plus on my book. Now there are some negative things as far as the modern mechanics too. Keeping with the positive, I'll just say really quick that there are new gameplay mechanics, such as a counter attack, where if you press the X button, you can do kind of like a melee attack. So if you have enemies charging at you, you can kind of like counter them, and that leaves them open for you to shoot them and, you know, do more damage. So the game does introduce a new mechanic of doing a counter physical attack that really you really have to practice the timing based on the type of enemy, and I think that was a very welcome addition. And it gets pretty challenging because certain enemies charge at you faster, some of them are slower, so you really have to get to know the enemies in this game and know how to pull the counter mechanic. And then also another welcome addition is the free aim, which is pretty cool. You have an increased level of precision when compared to the other or the other Metroid side-scrolling games, which was a very, very welcome addition. Now, going back to the negatives as far as the gameplay, this game offers a ton of upgrades and a ton of different missiles, super missiles, you know, all the different items that are somewhat typical of the Metroid universe that Samus can use. And because of the ton of upgrades and the new addition of I think they call them like action skills or whatever that are selected using the D-pad. There's I think up to 4 of them that you can find in the game. It gets very complicated as far as using the controls. Using the missiles, you have to be holding the R button to activate the missiles menu, and if you want to switch between the regular missiles and the super missiles, you're going to have to tap on the screen. And then, you know, when you want to do the regular free aim, you have to use the L button. So in areas where there are enemies, especially the boss battles, they can get very complicated, not because of the challenge of the boss itself, but because of the challenge of you trying to be very quick as far as, you know, switching weapons, switching missile types, using different actions, and at the same time trying to jump, do like double jumps or spin jumps and things like that. The game can get very frustrating as far as doing a lot of the actions that the game offers in a very quick time. So in that regard, I was you know, I had cramps at points in the game, and certain items that are, you kind of have to solve puzzles to get to them. Sometimes you have to use your morph ball, and then right after that you have to use an action item, and then after that you have to shoot a missile, and you have to do this in a very quick sequence. It can be frustrating, and you have to be very quick on your hands. And you know, the Nintendo 3DS not having the most ergonomically, you know, perfect setup, it can become frustrating to do all those actions at one time. But so that's one of the gripes in this game. Another, I guess, huge update obviously are the graphics, and the graphics are hit and miss here. I'm a little bit sad to see the sprite work go out, and this game instead offers like 3D models. And unfortunately, as we all know, the 3DS is not the most powerful machine out there. So you can see the jaggies and very, very unclean finishes as far as the character models and the enemies and whatnot. So that's a little bit unfortunate. I would have liked to see to have seen this game use sprites like the older Metroids, but again, it's kind of like a new addition to the series, and in a way, I'm somewhat happy that they decided to go on a different route. But on the level of analyzing this game from a graphical perspective, they did a fantastic job. A lot of the backgrounds are very detailed. There's a lot of things going on in the background. Very eerie atmosphere that is typical with the Metroid games. So they did a fantastic job setting up the mood and the atmosphere that is typical of the Metroid side-scrolling games. I think they did a very, very good job. You know, with the limitations of the Nintendo 3DS, and with that added new graphical presentation using 3D models, I think Mercury's team, they actually did a pretty good job. And then the soundtrack, of course, the soundtrack has a lot of familiar tunes that, if you have played previous Metroid games, you have probably heard some of these, you know, famous, you know, soundtracks in the past. So that's pretty cool. And again, it sets the atmosphere in this game. There's always something eerie and kind of creepy on the Metroid games, knowing that you're out there by yourself, you know, exploring these planets and facing all these very tough enemies. It's a plus on my end, as far as the you know, the soundtrack and the overall atmosphere of the game. And I guess finally, just to talk about a little bit about the level design, I thought it was good. As I mentioned earlier in this video, there are elements that make this feel like a separate and different game, and I think that's courtesy of Mercury's team. And also the boss battles in this game, especially the later ones, get very challenging. They're not super hard or anything, but there's one thing that really frustrated me, and this is something that is somewhat common in a lot of games. When you touch a boss, especially the later bosses in this game, they take a lot of they inflict a lot of damage upon Samus, even though you have the latest armors and everything, and that's fine. I can understand if the boss is charging at you and just sending you away and tackling you, attacking you basically. It makes sense for the boss to inflict a lot of damage on your character. But there are instances where you're just brushing your shoulder, like you're just touching you're running into the boss, for example, and then one full tank of your energy gets depleted. That is so frustrating. It kind of like breaks the immersion. What are these bosses made of? Like radioactive, material or poison, or it's just funny that sometimes some of these bosses, when they launch an attack on you, you take a lot of damage. But at the same time, if you just brush your shoulder or your elbow against them, you also take the same amount of damage. And it's kind of like an old school mechanic that it's unfortunate in my opinion, to see in modern games. If you run into the boss battle, you shouldn't be taking damage just because you're touching him basically. So that was a little bit frustrating, especially with the later bosses in the game, which are very, very tough. But the formula, it's similar to the Metroid II Game Boy game, in which you have a counter, and then every time you kill a new Metroid, that counter goes down, and that's basically your mission in the game, to eradicate the Metroid alien race in a way. And the cool thing is that the Metroids, they evolve during the game, so they get much tougher as the game progresses. And then of course there are bigger bosses that you have to face, especially towards the end of the game, that are very, very interesting. But overall, Metroid Samus Return, in my opinion, a fantastic game, one of the best 3DS games out there, and I think it lives up to to be in that select group, among Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion, and Zero Mission. I know fans love those games. I love those games myself. But I'm very happy to report that Metroid Samus Returns doesn't have anything to envy from those games, and it makes for a very, very solid side-scrolling Metroid entry in the series. So that's it for now. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all later.